Hello, I'm Kate Sully. I'm a visual artist. Welcome to my exhibition. It's called The Art of Disconnection and it's on at the Point in Doncaster. So my background is I'm from Tickhill, Doncaster. I went to school in Edlington and I did my foundation at Churchview in Doncaster. I now live in South Yorkshire and I have a studio space which I do my own work as well as I do facilitation and workshops with the community. The pieces behind me on the black background are pieces that I did when I was on my residency in Australia, January to March 2020, which was funded by the Arts Council. It was Develop Your Creative Practice Award. And I went to Australia with the idea that I probably was going to do something new because the whole idea was to develop my practice. And in the end, I did something radically different. I began painting, which I've only ever done a little bit, certainly not abstract painting like I've been doing now. The themes that I had in my head was about disconnection, connections to do with the brain, to do with how we think, maybe creating like a visual language that was going to express different things, and it was all a real voyage of discovery. So I took with me some images, some digital images of science imagery around the brain, and then I just started cutting things up. I bought a big roll of canvas and just started making these collage, painty sort of compositions. What was really exciting, I think, for me was I had the freedom in Australia because I had a studio space at Fremantle Arts Centre, and I suppose I just thought I can just do anything I want. I'm here, nobody knows what I do. And I started cutting things up and I had the freedom to sort of change things and make new things. So whenever something didn't quite look right, I just cut round the image, put it on a new bit of canvas and started painting. So that whole process developed into the pieces behind me with the colours, and I suppose just the sort of, it became just like an organic process where I almost couldn't stop doing it and they just grew into these pieces. Again, the ideas behind it was sort of thinking about connections and how using the idea of the brain and how thought patterns. And I suppose I got quite inspired by Indigenous art in Australia and the fact that certain shapes, obviously I haven't copied those, but I've used that idea that maybe certain shapes and certain marks could tell a bit of a story. So I started looking at that. And if you look at the work, there are quite a lot of repetitious forms. I mean, I can point them out. That there's certain shapes that I think I use. I'm not entirely sure what they mean yet, and I think for me, I've only been doing this a year. I feel like it's something I'm developing and progressing with, so it's quite an exciting time. Thinking about what inspired me to develop the shapes and the colours, I've always used colour in my work anyway, so I'm very interested in colour. I particularly like colour that really reacts together. I'm not subtle in any way. And I suppose being in Australia, I think if you look at these pieces, I think they are slightly more colourful because I think I was there, it was beautiful blue sky, there was loads of colour around. And I think the shapes, what I did was within say, if it was a scientific shape, I traced some of the shapes within those forms and then I copied them. That's what started me off with the sort of, I suppose the connections in between and the sort of progression of shape. It started from tracing what I saw in the science and then it became things I sort of automatically started using. And they grew into new things. I might get a tracing, trace it onto the canvas and then add another bit. So it's almost like it developed its own language, which was quite interesting. And I'd sort of do a lot of stepping back and going, actually, does that colour work? Because I think people think with your work that you paint it and you've done it. I spent a lot of time changing the colours. So I'd have one colour and then I'd go in the next day to the studio and go, that's not the right colour, what's missing? So it was a bit of it was quite a challenge because obviously I don't see myself as a painter, but the more I did it, the more confidence I got and thought, actually this is working quite well. And I had a lot of very positive feedback, which was really nice from my studio was near a lot of the workshops where the public came in and people would sort of stick their head through the door and go, ooh, what are you doing? And it sort of, I love the colours and it gave me that confidence, I think, to keep pushing it. And in that 8 weeks, I sort of ended up with like 4 or 5 massive paintings. So yeah. for probably the past 5 to 6 years, science has featured in my work, probably a bit more obviously than it used to. I think I've always been interested in science, but about 5 or 6 years ago, I decided rather than just sort of explore science in a oh, I'll just look at it on the internet or I'll just get a book. I approached the University of Sheffield and actually spoke to some scientists and some researchers about the work. And I think that was back in a piece of work I did called Reproduction, which was all around bioengineering. And I suppose I'm fascinated by how things work and what's underneath something, and having real cutting-edge science to refer to. So the pieces I've been doing in the last year, we're looking at neuroscience and around the brain. And I suppose I've always had this interest in whether, actually as an artist, is there something in our brains, or creative people, where, I don't know, there's something in your brain that actually you could say makes you a creative person. I mean, the researchers said they didn't know the answer to that. So I think it's quite an interesting thing. But for me, I think exploring how you could connect to your own creativity and how the pathways in the brain and the neurons connect you to different thoughts, I suppose that's why I want to use these particular images. And I suppose it's gone a bit abstract, but I know the starting point is there. And if you really look underneath the paint, you can see that my paintings are not one flat image. They're a collage of lots of different things, starting off with a digital image of a science image, and then I've collaged on top of that and sometimes revealed it, sometimes hidden it. So I think I like the layering of it. I think that's something that shows that it's, again, an exploration of something. It wasn't arrived at by one session in the studio. So when I arrived back from Australia, I'd obviously got some pieces. They weren't framed at the time because obviously they were just like hanging pieces that I put in the studio. And then I was also, in the meantime I've been in Australia, I was interested in, yes, exploring the process of how to create, I suppose it's how to build and create the structure of how I was going to make paintings. So it was like two things, I suppose. It was learning how to make a collage painting, actually physically make it by cutting up the shapes and rebuilding it onto a piece of canvas. But also I wanted to then, I suppose, hone the idea into, am I actually telling the story of brain connections, neuroscience? And I'd obviously been speaking to the University of Sheffield, to researchers at CITRAN, which is Sheffield Institute of Translational Neuroscience, and they were quite interested in working with me to explore ideas around their research, which was looking at dementia and Alzheimer's and how the brain changes and connections alter or get damaged. So in my work, I suppose the change between the two was me then taking research, more specific research, and using brain imagery, and then trying to tell a story. Now there is a couple of pieces that are, I suppose, in between pieces where I'm exploring that, and then I just start using the brain and getting bigger images like slices of the brain under an MRI scan or something like that, and then putting those into the collage and seeing how I can then tell the story of the research. So there were 3 different researchers I worked with, and they had very particular research fields looking at astrocytes, which is how they support the neurons in the brain and how their role is. There was also a researcher looking at your health, your physical health, and whether obesity might start to affect how potential chances of getting dementia. Again, all of this is research, none of it's definite as yet. And then there was also a researcher who was looking at how your brain reacts, and sometimes when you've got dementia, that you maybe go into a different consciousness. And he was very interested in the idea that an abstract rendition of that research might give someone with dementia almost like a hopefulness that, yes, you have got this thing wrong with your brain, but actually you're just in a different place. So we talked a lot, and then I did make some pieces for the Festival of the Mind, which was the university showcase of their research, which was last September. Yeah, so that's where I'm at the moment. So what next for me is, I've already ordered some new digital imagery. Now this is, I suppose, just shapes and there's some science stuff, some brain stuff in there, but there's also just different shapes, because I like to start with, I suppose it's a starting point for me rather than just straight painting. Maybe it's a confidence thing for me that I just need those printed imagery to get me going. But what I want to do is mix up what I've learnt about the brain and the connections that I've learnt from that and the science and the research side with what I've learnt about actually how to paint and how to tell a story through the forms and the shapes, and probably use a little bit of what I did in Australia, because looking back at those pieces has made me think there's elements there that I could maybe bring into the new. So I think it's going to be a hybrid of all of it. So I'm quite excited. So yeah, so I'm already on with some new paintings, big, same size, but yeah, slightly different colours. I want to push myself and see, I think with the painting techniques as well, how I can maybe start honing into whether why am I using certain forms and shapes, because they do recur, and what I can do with that, and maybe simplify things a little bit, maybe calm things down a little bit. So we'll see, yeah. So definitely.